selamat datang untuk mengikuti webinar ini. The presentation will be bilingual, mostly in English, tapi kadang-kadang juga dalam bahasa Indonesia. Saya dibantu hari ini oleh staf saya, Sweta Mangarani dan Dosa Damayanti, and we hope that we can give you a good information session today, a webinar entitled COVID-19 in Indonesia and Beyond, Lessons to be Learned. We have a full house today. We have 4 speakers, so it's, we unfortunately cannot give the speakers too much time to present their presentation. We also want to have enough time for questions and answers, the Q&A session for our participants. I have to excuse myself. I don't have a medical background, jadi kalau saya nanti pronounce some of the medical terms tidak sesuai dengan pronunciation yang baik dan benar, saya minta maaf sebelumnya. I try always to avoid to meet doctors actually, so I hope you don't mind if I make some mistakes in the pronunciation in that respect. I will introduce the speakers one by one, so you have a good background on the esteemed speakers that we have from Holland, from Leiden, and from Indonesia. And then I will give the floor to the speakers to start their presentation. First, I want to introduce Professor Maria Yazdanbakhsh. She's a professor in cellular immunology of parasitic infections and is the head of the Department of Parasitology at the Leiden University Medical Center. She holds visiting professorships at the University of Indonesia in Jakarta and the University of Hasanuddin in Makassar. She's the president of the Dutch Society for Parasitology and scientific coordinator of the Leiden Controlled Human Infection Center. Recently, a Center for Controlled Human Infections has been created at Leiden University Medical Center, where volunteers are intentionally infected with malaria, schistosomes, or hookworms, adhering to procedures for absolute safety. This is a highly innovative approach for studying the host-parasite interaction at clinical, cellular, and molecular level. Such controlled infections speed up vaccine and drug testing and thereby serving population health worldwide. And also just last week, Professor Maria was nominated for the Huybrechtsen Award for research on malaria vaccine. So I hope we all are convinced that she will get the award. And she will give a lecture on the varying profile of COVID-19 cases and deaths across different continents. The second speaker is Dr. Dicky Tahapary. Dr. Dicky is a lecturer at the Division of Endocrinology and Metabolism at the Department of Internal Medicine, Faculty of Medicine of Universitas Indonesia, and also researcher at the Metabolic, Vascular, and Aging Cluster, the Indonesian Medical Education and Research Institute, or in short, IMERI. He received his medical education at Universitas Indonesia and did his PhD in Leiden, besides additional training and courses in Singapore, Hong Kong, and Seoul. Dr. Tahapary has a special interest in diabetes mellitus, obesity, and insulin resistance, and endocrinology problems. The title of his presentation is The Impact of Obesity and Diabetes on COVID-19 Risk and Outcomes, Lessons from Jakarta. Third is Dr. Farid Kurniawan. Dr. Farid graduated as medical doctor from the Faculty of Medicine, also from the University of Indonesia in 2007, and received his internal medicine specialist degree from the same university in 2015. In the same year, he was appointed as medical staff at the Division of Endocrinology and Metabolism Department of Internal Medicine at the Faculty of Medicine of UI. Since 2017, he joined the Indonesian Medical Education Research Institute, IMERI, as a research member in the Metabolic Disorder, Cardiovascular, and Aging Cluster. His research is mainly in the field of endocrinology and metabolism, including diabetes, obesity, thyroid disorders, and other endocrine problems. Dr. Kurniawan is now pursuing his PhD degree in Leiden Medical Center under the guidance of Professor Maria. His PhD project mainly focuses on the effect of urbanization on metabolic health and allergy, aiming to understand more on how urbanization influences the immune system and the pathogenesis of obesity and type 2 diabetes. The title of His lecture is The Role of Urbanization on the Development of Obesity and Diabetes. Last but not least is Dr. Mikhael Manurung. He obtained his medical degree also from University of Indonesia in 2014 and currently is awaiting his PhD degree from the Department of Parasitology of Leiden University Medical Center. In his PhD project, he investigated how the human immune system responds to parasite infections, including malaria and the human hookworm. He's interested in the intersection of epidemiology, immunology, and bioinformatics. Meanwhile, he joined the Functional Genomics Group at LUMC, the Leiden University Medical Center, as a postdoc to investigate the impact of urbanization and lifestyle on the immune profile of Senegalese adults using single-cell RNA sequencing and other cutting-edge techniques under a grant from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. And during his PhD, he also found the time to become the chairperson of the Indonesian Student Association, PPI Leiden, from the term 2017 to 2018. Busy man. The title of his lecture is COVID-19 and Lessons That Can Be Learned from Rural Indonesia. And with no further ado, I would like to give the floor to our first speaker, Professor Maria Yazdanbakhsh. Please, Ibu Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen then. Okay. Is it visible?
Yes.
Okay. So thanks very much for selecting this topic and inviting us to present. Selamat siang to everyone. That will be my only bahasa. So what I'll talk about is really variation in COVID-19 cases and deaths across different continents. And because that might be very interesting research topic to help us deal with the pandemic that is raging not only in our country here, but also in Indonesia. All the data can be found on a recent science commentary that we've written, COVID-19 in Africa, Dampening the Storm. So all the slides are from the data that we've presented in this paper. So I would like to show you this slide. You will see the number of COVID-19 cases per million here on the left-hand side of the screen, and COVID-19 deaths per million on the right side. And in different colors, with what is happening is depicted. What's happening in Europe, you see the orange, America, Northern America, you see in yellow, Asia, it's in gray, and Africa is in red. You hardly see it. And it's the same here for the number of deaths. The deaths were very much in Europe, in America. And then when you look at Africa, there's really much less death compared to the other continents. So this is per million, so it's corrected for the population size. And this is an enormous variation in the cases and deaths. So why we have focused on Africa as the very interesting case to try and learn from to help us combat the pandemic. And I'd like to go through the question why such differences might be seen, one step at a time. Scientific investigation into this can really help us combat this and the next pandemics, as I just said. So this looks like a complex picture, but it's quite simple. One of the first things everybody says is, why is this difference? It's because in Africa, there's not sufficient testing. So one way of looking at this is to look at the number of tests and the number of cases that are then detected. This line here, if the number of tests is equal to number of cases, then you say, you know, there's probably not enough testing, because people are, when they have a symptom, they come and they get tested. When they're hospitalized, they get tested. So the number of tests is only kept for those that are probably a real case, that they are COVID positive. However, if you look outside Africa in the lower and in Africa in the upper case, many of the countries actually show the same pattern as in Europe. So meaning that that's not the case. It's not that the number of tests are limiting. They're less tested, but they are not limiting. It's the same way as in outside Africa. So it's important to realize that although everybody says, oh, because we're not testing enough, you have to really look at this ratio of number of tests performed and number of cases that are found to be positive for COVID-19. And with that, you can see whether there is sufficient tests done or not. And for Africa, this doesn't seem to explain this low number of cases and deaths that we're seeing. Stringency measures. So if you do rapid lockdown, ban on gatherings, and contact tracing, for example, isolating people, all these stringency measures can have a great impact on the spread of the virus. We all know that. And what is interesting is in Africa, the stringency measures were much rapidly imposed, much more rapidly than on other continents. So here in blue is what happened in Africa. Days since the first case was detected, there was a lockdown. In some countries, before they even had a case, they put in the measures, stringency measures in place, whereas in other continents, they were much less rapid, they were much less effective, much less stringent than in Africa. So this is interesting. Africa did a great job of placing stringency measures. So really strong measures to contain the virus seem to be contributing to the low number of cases and deaths that we see. However, we also know that crowding in many of the cities, large metropolitan cities in Africa, is a real problem, and social distancing is not possible. So it's still interesting that we see such low number of cases and deaths in Africa, because crowding is a real issue there. And I think that's relevant, of course, to Indonesia, of course, also, as you would know. Age is really, really important. So what we have here is in Europe and US, this is the age pyramid, typical age pyramid, whereas on the African continent, Africa has a youthful population. So you see a lot more people at the younger age group. And if we look here, this is who dies from COVID. It's really the 70-year-old plus. It's once you go above age of 60, the dying from COVID becomes much more, happens much more than if you are younger. And so if you have a young population in Africa, of course, then you will not see as many deaths as you would, for example, see in Europe or USA, where a lot more people are older than 60 years of age. However, we've done some calculations, and given the age pyramid in Africa, one would expect 4 times less deaths in Africa. But what is seen is 40 times less deaths in Africa. So although age is a very important factor, and we should really understand why age is an important factor in COVID, it is really not the only explanation of why Africa has less deaths than on other continents. And of course, comorbidities are a very important issue, and that is also associated with age. But we have experts today who will talk about that, about comorbidities and COVID-19. So I'll leave that to them. Some people also question whether the virus is different in Africa. Maybe SARS-CoV-2 has a different genetic makeup that is not as virulent compared to on other continents. But if you look at the genetic makeup of the virus, data available from African continent and other areas in the world, what you see is there's absolutely no difference. They're distributed through all the different genetic clades. So it is not that Africa has a special genetically distinct SARS-CoV-2 that is less virulent. Last thing is the host. People can have very different immune response to virus. So the immune system is very distinct between Africa and, for example, Europe, using very sophisticated methodology that will also be it will be described by the last speaker today. We have looked at the differences in the immune system. How is your immune system in Africa compared if you live in Europe? And there are huge differences. The only thing this picture is to tell those, because I'm sure a lot of you are not immunologists, so all you have to really focus on is, for example, here you see some cells of the immune system and the difference between Europeans. You see this is looking very different to what we see in Africans. So the immune system is very different between Europe and Africa, and the immune system plays a central role in the COVID infection and outcome in SARS-2 infection and COVID outcome. So it is possible that the immune system is contributing to the difference that is seen. And please remember, people will say, well, Europeans and Africans are very genetically distinct. However, if you go and look within Africa, so these are data from Senegal, yes, Europeans have distinct immune responses. They're grouped here compared to Senegalese. However, if you go to urban Senegal, so this is the capital city in Senegal, people living in the capital city, they also have a very distinct immune response from those who live in the rural areas of Senegal. And you know, this distinction in the immune, so it's not just genetics, but also environmental factors could be driving the differences in the immune system, and the differences might be explaining the variation in COVID-19 number of deaths or in number of cases that are infected with SARS-CoV-2 virus. So why I'm saying that is because you know, we need to understand these differences. And, you know, Indonesia has a great possibility to contribute to the community that wants to combat COVID-19. It's a rich country in the way that it has a large population, it has a very varied environment and genetically diverse populations as well. And to do research and join the communities that really are trying to combat COVID-19 would be great to have Indonesian participating in this. And what is important, maybe, you know, first of all, is of course collection of high quality data to be able to describe patterns and then ask questions that you can help resolve are in terms of policy, which measures are most effective. If we look at different measures and what an effect they've had, we can choose the one that is most important and focus our attention on the most effective one and not waste time on imposing measures that have tiny amount of effect. In terms of social science, of course, consequences of the measures, we need to weigh the consequences of measures in terms of economics and in terms of health outcome. That's really very important as well. What is the mechanism behind the relation between age and COVID-19? Why are older people dying but the young ones are protected? Why are males more susceptible than females? Why are those with comorbidities more susceptible? And finally, what are the immunological mechanisms that are contributing to COVID-19 outcome? I think Indonesia can really be actively participating in answering these questions if they wish. I'd just like to introduce the LUMC Global. This is a program of Leiden University Medical Center, and we are a community that does research with our international partners, and Indonesia is an important one. And LUMC Global has 3 fellowships. They're Willem Alexandra and Maxima fellowships for Indonesian bright minds interested in biomedical research who also want to contribute to the health of their country. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ibu Maria. Thank you, terima kasih atas presentasi yang sangat menarik. I only have some questions myself, but I wait until all the presentations are done. With no further ado, I would like to introduce the second speaker, Mr. Dr. Dicky Tahapary, and he will talk about the impact of obesity and diabetes on COVID-19 and specifically lessons from Jakarta. So I'm very eager to hear his presentation. Pak Dicky, silahkan.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Pak Marik, for the nice introduction, and thank you, Maria, for giving a nice overview about the different COVID-19 in different continents. So today I will share a bit about the impact of obesity and diabetes mellitus on COVID-19, especially focusing on the data gathered so far from Jakarta. So why are these two diseases are actually important? Maria mentioned before that comorbidities is actually play an important role in terms of mortality from COVID-19. And why these two diseases are very important? Because if we look into the basic health research from Indonesia from 2007 and 2018, you can see there's a dramatic increase in terms of proportion of adults with obesity in Indonesia, as well as proportion of adults with diabetes mellitus in Indonesia. If you look into the central obesity, the recent data from 2018, 3 out of 10 Indonesian adults had obesity. It can be either general obesity or as well as central obesity. And in terms of diabetes mellitus, 1 out of 10 Indonesian adults had also been diagnosed as having diabetes. So these two non-communicable diseases actually put a major burden in terms of management in Indonesia. And now with the rising COVID-19 pandemic, it has been reported that these two diseases actually play an important role increasing the severity and mortality of COVID-19. So my talk would be about the impact of obesity and diabetes mellitus on COVID-19 in low to middle income countries, especially lessons from Jakarta. So it has been really well described in the review by Walker et al. And the Science, new publications. So the impact of COVID-19 in low and middle countries might be different in comparison with the high income countries. Maria has already mentioned about the younger populations may reduce the overall risk. But other factors can actually also play a role. For example, limited health system capacity. As you can see here in the figure, you can see on the base of the group of World Bank income group, it is the availability of hospital bed for 1,000 people. You can see the lower the income, you can see the less hospital bed available for 1,000 people. And if you look into the number of ICU bed per 100 hospital beds, you also see the same trends. So in the low and middle income country, you see there's less hospital bed and less ICU bed. And the next thing is about the closer intergenerational contact. Usually in many low and middle income countries, including Indonesia, we have close contact with our grandfather, grandmother, and even all the elderly. We have really a close contact. So this might also increase the spread of the COVID-19. And I will talk about the NCD, non-communicable diseases, about the obesity and diabetes mellitus, which mostly here in Indonesia are diagnosed at a relatively younger age compared to its control from, for example, from Caucasians. So these factors might potentially negate the benefit of having a younger population in Indonesia. So this is the data from Fatima that analyzed the comparison between the prevalence of metabolic syndrome from Indonesian population and Dutch population aged more than 45 years old. If you can have a look here, you can appreciate that the prevalence of abdominal obesity about 40%. This is the same prevalence of obesity in the Dutch populations. And while having the same prevalence of abdominal obesity, it is important to note that the prevalence of hyperglycemia or increased fasting plasma glucose is a bit higher, but 50% compared to 30%. So despite having the status of low to middle income country, actually Indonesia has already increased prevalence of obesity as well as its complications. In this case, it's a hyperglycemia as well also relatively higher compared to the Dutch. So for all participants from Jakarta, you have already seen this data before. It's presented by the Governor Anies, if you can see here, this is the estimate of the active case of COVID-19 in Jakarta. The SBB, it means the lockdown. When we put the lockdown measure, you can see actually the graph is a bit flattening. But when we have the transitional lockdown, you can see there's increasing number of cases. And about the number of deaths as well, you can see here when we first did the lockdown, the governor did the lockdown, actually the number of deaths is actually reduced. But then in the transition lockdown, you can see there's an increasing number of deaths we observe in Jakarta. And in terms of the number of bed occupancy rate, you can see here, there's also the same issue. When we perform the lockdown, it's flattening the curve. We managed to flatten the curve, but then we saw in the past few weeks, there's an exponentially increase in terms of number of COVID cases, as well in terms of bed occupancy. And this also the ICU for the intensive care unit, also there is exponential increase in the need of ICU bed. And it is predicted if the same rate goes on and on, so about October, we have already full all the hospital bed with the number of COVID as well as the ICU bed as well. But now the government is trying to increase the capacity of the healthcare to cope with this problem. So this is the data from Jakarta up until now, until the August, the last August, from the 2,481 cases of positive for COVID-19, 3.4% recorded as having diabetes mellitus. So actually, this is the same amount of prevalence as diagnosed diabetes in Jakarta. So we might potentially argue that the diabetes actually is not associated with increased risk of COVID-19 because the prevalence of diabetes among those tested for positive for COVID actually the same with the prevalence of diagnosed diabetes in the general population. But if you look at the mortality, there's a dramatic increase in terms of mortality. So among those having diabetes, the mortality rate is reaching 20%, while in non-diabetes, the mortality is less than 3%. So that having diabetes is associated with increased mortality by almost 8 times. This is an unadjusted model, but when you adjusted the model, having diabetes has increasing rate of death by 3.5. So this is the data so far we gathered with the local health authority from Jakarta. We analyzed the data together, and so far we have the data. How about obesity? Well, the problem with obesity is in most cases, the status of obesity was not recorded in the report. So it's difficult to analyze. But when we exclude the data, when we compare the mortality in obese is almost about 7%, while in non-obese about 2.5%. So it's not as prominent as the impact of diabetes, but there's a scarcity of data. We will try to reanalyze the data once we get more data on the obesity recorded among those COVID-19 positive subjects. So when we did our systematic review meta-analysis, one of the students, Tamara, did a very nice meta-analysis showing that actually in obesity across different populations is consistent to be an independent risk and prognostic factors for disease severity and the requirements of advanced medical care. So if we assume the prevalence of obesity, for example, in Indonesia about 30%, so there is a high chance if those persons were infected with COVID-19, there's a higher chance for those people will be admitted and will require advanced medical care. So aside from diabetes, there's also an issue about the fasting plasma glucose. So this is a nice meta-analysis, dose-response meta-analysis performed by one of our students, Gilbert, showing that the fasting blood glucose during admission is associated with a consistently higher risk for poor outcome, for mortality, as well as severity. So there's also a linear dose response in terms of severity. So the higher the fasting plasma glucose, the higher the mortality. If you look into the previous data that I showed you before, if you see the same rate of obesity, you can see there's a higher chance of having a higher fasting plasma glucose among Indonesians. So whether this would then affect to the higher mortality, it will still need further study. So in summary, in Indonesia, despite having it is a low and middle income country, we have a higher prevalence of obesity, diabetes mellitus, and rapid increase in COVID-19. And the diabetes mellitus and obesity actually has been consistently shown to be associated with worse outcome in COVID-19. But obesity often being overlooked, and the limited healthcare resources might increase the fatality rate. But the data I show you here is only the data from urban Indonesia. Prof. Maria have already mentioned before that the prevalence or the impact on COVID-19 on mortality might differ in rural area. So I think this will be discussed by the next speaker, by Dr. Farid and then Dr. Manurung. I think that would be my last slide, and thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Dr. Dicky. The situation in Jakarta is worrying at this point. So we hope that the new PSBB that have been introduced by the governor will flatten the curve, as the risk is that there is not enough capacity in the hospitals for COVID patients. And this is a trend that unfortunately we see also now in the Netherlands, an increasing number of COVID infections with local PSBBs also in place in the Netherlands. Thank you. You already actually introduced the next speaker, Dr. Farid. So I would like to give the word to Dr. Farid Kurniawan for his presentation on the role of urbanization, the development of obesity and diabetes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Pak Marik. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning in Leiden. I changed a bit about my title, so it covers more about COVID-19. So today I'm going to share about urbanization, obesity, and type 2 diabetes, and what are the impact on COVID-19. As we all know that Indonesia, as low and middle income countries, is facing epidemiological transitions in the disease patterns. The communicable diseases like tuberculosis and dengue, and then helminth infection and malaria is still highly prevalent, especially in certain area of Indonesia. But the non-communicable diseases like obesity, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular diseases are steadily increased in Indonesia. The reason for this phenomenon could be caused by the socio-economic improvement across Indonesia, with the development of from the government, and also the higher rate of urbanization. In fact, there is a significant different prevalence of these diseases between urban and rural. If we talk about urban and rural, these two populations have very different characteristics. For urban, people reside in urban, they relatively consume higher fat and high calorie diet or Westerner diet, and then with relatively less physical activity, with higher stress level, and also higher pollution level that could be as endocrine disruptors. Meanwhile, in rural, the opposite, the population in rural usually consume lower calories and fat intake, and with relatively more fiber, and they are more physically active, and in some part of area they're still quite high exposures to what farm environment, and also pathogen exposures like parasites, helminths, such as soil transmitted helminths. So because of this difference of characteristic, there will be changes in the body related with the health. This is the changes that happen in the urban. We could see if the people in urban consume more calories compared to what they spend, they will have a positive energy balance or surplus, and it will be stored in body as fat. And higher adipose tissue content in the body will secrete more pro-inflammatory cytokines or adipokines. Meanwhile, those type of diet and also the environment itself could influence the gut microbiota composition, with become less diverse and also different in the relative abundance of certain bacteria. and this will lead also to higher intestinal permeability. This condition, all of this condition will lead to a chronic low-grade inflammatory state that we all know is a state or condition that predisposed to obesity, insulin resistance, and type 2 diabetes. That's why all of this condition might explain the higher prevalence, or in general, higher prevalence of obesity and type 2 diabetes in urban. So our studies, Dicky and I, and together with other people also, we confirmed this finding that living in urban area is associated with unfavorable adiposity profiles like higher body mass index, higher waist circumference, and also higher fat percentage, and higher insulin resistance, and a shift towards a more pro-inflammatory condition. In this case, we found a higher leptin level and also higher CRP in urban subject compared to rural. And we performed also a short-term high-fat, high-calories diet that could induce insulin resistance. And we observed that this increase in insulin resistance is more pronounced in rural subjects compared to urban. And our recent study, prospective cohort study, evaluating the rural subjects that just migrate to urban, we observed them for 1 year. They experienced twice higher increase of body mass index compared to people that born and stayed in urban. So if we stay in the rural area, it seems that staying in rural area doesn't protect someone from metabolic changes if they adopt urban lifestyle. Even in this case, we observe worse changes. So what is the impact of all that I already mentioned above on COVID-19? Like Dicky already said that there are a lot of conditions related with higher mortality and severe disease entity due to COVID-19, from systematic review and meta-analysis. Also, Maria already mentioned about male gender, older age, underlying respiratory disease like COPD, and the most important one, the cardiometabolic risk factor or non-communicable diseases that I already mentioned, like obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and cardiovascular diseases. So what are the reasons for these diseases and these comorbidities to have a higher mortality in COVID-19? I tried to summarize some of the hypotheses. Here we could see that in older age and the cardiovascular comorbidity like obesity, diabetes, hypertension, they have more aging cells that could secrete more inflammatory markers. So we could call a term we call inflammaging, and it caused the low-grade inflammatory condition. And this condition could also associate with impaired mucosal and systemic immune response, and also endothelial dysfunction. All of these changes could cause those subjects or those people are more susceptible toward infection. There's a defect in viral antigen presentations. There's an impair in immune system like the T cells, and also a reduced and delayed antibody response and low neutralizing antibody, and with higher pro-inflammatory cytokines and increased risk for thrombosis. All of this could lead to we call severe COVID-19 and lead to mortality, sometimes associated with cytokine storm. So if we talk about urban and rural, all of the phenomena above I mentioned in urban. So we could assume that higher prevalence of COVID-19 with severe disease, entity, and mortality will happen in urban or will be observed in urban compared to rurals. Unfortunately, we don't have those exact data until now, especially in Indonesia. But recent data from United States and India showed that the center of infection is shifting towards rural area. As we all remember that in the beginning of the outbreak of COVID-19 in Indonesia, we could observe that most cases are from urban area like Jakarta, Surabaya, Denpasar, and also Makassar, which are big cities in Indonesia. But now we could observe that these diseases are spreading across all over Indonesia. And in addition, data from India showed that the proportion of daily deaths from rural area for the total death in those countries is already increased twice in the couple weeks compared to in the beginning of the outbreak. So there's question, what are the reasons, what are the causes? I try to summarize also the causes for the increased number of cases and also death in rural area. The first is the migration back from urban to rural. As we know that this COVID-19 pandemic really hit hard our economic, and it causes a lot of people lost their job, lost their income, and because of they lost their income, they could not survive in the urban, especially if this is the migrating people from rural to urban previously. So they are forced to come back again to their rural origin area. But unfortunately, if they have SARS-CoV-2 virus in their body, if they are asymptomatic or mild cases, then they will spread the cases to the rural. And this, the communal cultures or communal structures in rural area will get this spreading worse, because in rural there's relatively closer individual relationships, so the contact will be closer. And another reason here is the less information or misinformed about COVID-19 in rural area. As we know that previously we heard that this COVID-19 is a disease for rich people and the poor people are not going to affect it, or if will be affected, they will be mild and cured. So this misinformation will lead to less preventive measures applied in the rural area, so the spreading of the infection will be easier. Another reason is the less access toward PCR testing. Because of the facility of PCR testing in rural area is lacking, so the asymptomatic and mild cases will not be detected and they will spread the infection toward other people. And the last one is the limited healthcare facility with lower quality. We could expect that Dicky that already mentioned less bed and also less ICU in the lower income countries, but we could also expect that would be lower also in rural area. And with severe cases increasing number in the rural area, we could expect more mortality in the rural. So the further study is needed, like Maria already said. We need to evaluate, or we need to have a study that designed to know first how the cardiometabolic risk factors, aging, and gender influence the COVID-19 pathophysiology. Here in Indonesia, our team, me and Dicky, and also collaborating with Prof. Maria, set up a study we called Caramel Study, COVID-19 Aging and Cardiometabolic Study, that try to evaluate what are the interrelationship between aging and cardiometabolic risk factors, and also the immune system, especially in type 2 diabetes, to see or to unravel how is the pathophysiology of COVID-19. But the study now is setting up in the urban, and I think it will be very important, and we will need a lot the study setting also in rural. And I realized that this study or this research regarding COVID-19 is a multidisciplinary study. So it not only covers science faculty, but also social faculties. Hopefully with this study or setup of the study, we could answer questions that Maria asked before regarding COVID-19, and hopefully will improve the outcome and stop the spreading of COVID-19. Thank you so much.
Ya, terima kasih Pak Farid. Very interesting presentation, dan saya senang sekali bahwa my stored body fat I can call now positive energy balance. Thank you very much. Now the next speaker, the last but not least, is Mikhael Dito Manurung with a presentation on COVID-19 and lessons that can be learned from rural Indonesia. Please, Mikhael, the floor is yours. Thank you.
All right, can you see my screen and hear me well now?
Yeah, okay, I can see your presentation. Yes, great.
Great. Okay, so good afternoon. I'm Mikhael, currently doing my PhD in parasitology at LUMC, and I'm also partly appointed in the functional genomics group of human genetics as a postdoc. Previously, Maria has discussed the variation of COVID-19 cases and deaths across different continents. Before COVID-19, we have also recognized such geographical variations, albeit in different but possibly related contexts. In this brief presentation, I will give a few examples and possible explanations of those variations, what we have done and will do in the LUMC in that area of research. And finally, after a slight detour from the topic of the day, COVID-19, I will present a possible link to COVID-19. So we have recognized that vaccine responses and disease profiles vary across different continents. Firstly, rotavirus vaccine efficacy is slower and also wane more quickly in children from LMICs or from high child mortality countries. Secondly, the prevalence of inflammatory diseases such as asthma and atopy are higher in Western societies. So far, we may be tempted to conclude that such variations may occur due to genetic variations. However, many population studies in low and middle income countries have showed that atopy and asthma prevalence is lower in children living in rural areas than in children living in urban areas. These epidemiological observations suggest that there are factors other than genetics that may give rise to those variations. One of these factors is microbial exposure. It is one of the most important triggers to induce normal immune maturation. At birth, our immune system is skewed toward the type 2 immune response. For a fetus, Th2 skewing is beneficial as it promotes immune tolerance and prevents fetal rejection. So here we see that in farms or in rural areas, the abundance and richness of the microbial exposures may help the immune system to mature earlier and develop strong counter-regulatory responses to counteract excessive inflammation. In that way, the immune system can remain in homeostasis better. In Westernized societies, however, microbes are less abundant and less diverse, thereby delaying immune maturation and thus prolong Th2 skewing, and this may increase the risk of atopy and asthma later in life. These microbial exposures, which also include helminths, number of siblings, pet ownership, and environmental biodiversity, are part of the environmental exposures related to the so-called hygiene or old friends hypothesis. Studies investigating how parasites skew our immune responses, as well as the impact of rural to urban transition to vaccine responses and prevalence of inflammatory diseases, is among the expertise of the Department of Parasitology at the LUMC. The department has a multidisciplinary research team and broad expertise, as well as teams of diverse nationalities. Valuing diversity is a core value of the department, which helps and nurture the long-standing partnership between LUMC and collaborators in various countries, including but not limited to Gabon, Senegal, and Indonesia. In addition to basic immunological research in the lab, the department also collaborates with clinical and field researchers, frequently combining clinical, epidemiological, and immunological expertise to investigate the immune system with cutting-edge techniques, in particular mass cytometry, or also known as CyTOF. Mass cytometry, also known as cytometry by time of flight, has similar principles as flow cytometry, if you know about it. We incubate the cells together with antibodies that can bind to proteins either in the surface or inside the cells. And then we acquire the cells in this machine. And then afterwards, we can define the characteristics of cells in accordance to the molecules expressed by the cells. The key difference between mass and flow cytometry is that for CyTOF, we stain the cells with antibodies that are tagged with rare earth metals. This, and in combination with the time of flight mass spectrometer, enables us to look at more than 40 parameters and can be even more in the future. And know that everything is on a single cell resolution. So compared to the traditional flow cytometry, which may include up to around 20 markers, the scale of the information that we can gain using this machine is unprecedented. So classically, this is just a brief overview. Flow cytometry data is analyzed by manually drawing gates on the scatter plot of marker intensities. So it is feasible to do this when we only have a few markers, but it will quickly become tedious if we say have more than 40 markers. And moreover, researchers usually do flow cytometry to look for a particular immune cell subset. So we are not drawing every possible combination of the markers. So we need to analyze CyTOF data differently. So Disney, a machine learning algorithm, can be used to reduce the dimensionality of data from tens of markers to 2 dimensions. So briefly, Disney takes into account all markers expressed by the cells and then put similar cells closer together and push away different cells. And after running Disney, you can then overlay the expression of certain marker to define the phenotype of the cells. This data-driven approach allows us to characterize immune cells with high resolution and in an unbiased manner that may lead to the discovery of previously uncharacterized immune cells. Thanks to the combination of cutting-edge tools and state-of-the-art data analysis techniques, our group were able to identify distinct immune signatures in Europeans and Indonesians. Here we show that the immune profile of urban Indonesians living in Jakarta resembles Europeans rather than rural Indonesians living in Nangapanda, Flores Island. This is the density representation of the Disney plot that we saw earlier. Yellow to red color indicates region of high abundance of cells of high density, whereas the green to blue the otherwise. Looking at these HSNE plots, we can get an overview of the similarity or difference of immune cell abundance and composition across the groups. Here we observe, among many other findings, a higher Th2 frequencies in rural Indonesians and a comparable frequency of this immune cell between urban Indonesian and the urban Dutch. This finding suggests that environments may play a bigger role in shaping our immune system than our genetic makeup. The next question is, which components exactly of the environments that influence our immune system? Still from the same article, here we show that the helminth-infected rural Indonesians, so ID3, have a higher Th2 frequencies. Upon deworming, so ID post, Indonesian post deworming, we can see that the cell abundance significantly decreased. It's not shown here, but we also find a higher frequencies of IL-10 producing CD4 T cells in rural Indonesians. And upon deworming, we observe a statistically significant decrease of the cell frequency as well. This adds to the existing body of evidence in the importance of helminths to modulate the immune system. So this has also been showed by Maria before in a recent commentary to COVID-19. Our group, together with collaborators, discussed possible reasons underlying low prevalence and mortality of COVID in Africa. Here we show the differences in immune signatures of European and Senegalese. This plot visualizes multivariate analysis of various immune parameters. And here, within the Senegalese, you can see that the immune profile of urban Senegalese are different from their rural counterpart. And here's the data. On x-axis, you can see the cytokines. Y-axis is the frequencies of cytokine-producing cells within the CD4 T cells compartment. And the color gradient corresponds to the group. From left to right, we have rural Senegalese, and urban Dutch. We can see that the rural Senegalese have greater pro-inflammatory responses upon stimulation of PBMCs with PMA ionomycin, a polyclonal stimuli. In addition, Rural Senegalese also have a higher Th2 over Th1 ratio, indicating Th2 skewing. So far, I have shown the geographical variations of the immune system, not only across different continents, but also within the same region across an urban to rural gradient. So general concepts regarding immune response to SARS-CoV-2 infections are starting to emerge. To my knowledge, we can conclude so far that suboptimal or excessive T-cell responses is associated with severe COVID disease. However, due to the heterogeneity of patients involved in the studies, it is difficult to find an universal pattern that may prevent or cause severe disease. Well, it is also possible that there may not be such universal pattern. But what actually influenced the disease outcomes? Severe disease in healthy young patients led to the formation of the ongoing COVID human genetic effort, which seek to elucidate genetic factors that may explain the heterogeneity of disease outcomes. And today we have talked a lot about geographical variations, and indeed geographical variations of immune response to COVID-19 has not been well studied. Previously, I've shown evidence suggesting that such geographical variations do exist. Following the old friends hypothesis, it is possible that we may see mild disease among people living in areas with rich microbial or helminth exposures, such as on farm or rural areas. And previously, we have shown the distinct immune profile of urban and rural Indonesians. It is possible that such variation may influence COVID-19 disease outcomes, and this can be an entry for Indonesia to be part of the global roadmap for COVID-19 research. And of course, it would be interesting to conduct a study comparing disease outcomes of COVID-19 in urban and rural Indonesia, and if such differences do exist, to perform immunological studies to characterize immune cell subsets that may be protective or deleterious. In addition, such immunoepidemiological studies can also be useful should there be a geographical differences in response to the future vaccines against COVID. That being said, more tests have to be conducted throughout the regions of Indonesia. So today I have discussed the variation of vaccine responses and disease profiles across geographic responses, across geographic regions. Environmental exposures such as microbes and helminths may modulate the immune system, resulting in significant consequences. And we can observe geographic variations of immune signatures, which could be explained by the difference in environmental factors, such as infections with helminths. And we have seen a strong Th2 and regulatory T cells in rural Indonesians, and this may have a possible implications to COVID-19 disease outcomes. So that is all for my talk. Thank you for attending this talk. Well, I would like to acknowledge LPDP for funding my PhD study, my colleagues in LMC Para, Mustafa, my teachers in FKUI, in particular Prof. Tania, who opened the opportunity for me to do this PhD. And thank you.
Yes, terima kasih banyak, Mikhael, for this also interesting and for me a bit too technical maybe presentation on the topic on COVID-19 and lessons to be learned from rural Indonesia. I think the question about environment versus genetics is the same as the discussion between nature or nurture in terms of the development of the human mind. So it's a very interesting topic, the similarities, but also the differences between people living in urban areas and rural areas, and to what extent they are prone to get infected by COVID, and to what extent they are going to be affected by COVID. We are now have arrived to the question and answer session. And we really invite the participants semua yang ikut webinar ini untuk kalau ada pertanyaan bisa di chat box, nanti akan disampaikan ke saya. But I can maybe already start with a few questions for the speakers, and I would like to go to the first speaker, Ibu Maria. You mentioned the situation in Africa, and that in Africa, most countries very quickly already impose stringent measures to make sure that the spreading would be not as quick. I was wondering why, even though there was in some countries no infection yet, they already did a kind of lockdown or stringent measures. Was this based on the experience of African countries in dealing with pandemics? I can imagine that because of, for instance, Ebola, stringent measures were introduced in some African countries. Could this be one of the reasons?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something I did not mention. One of the major issues is that public health measures might actually be better in place because of the experience with previous pandemics. Indeed, I think Ebola has been a real wake-up call for many countries there, and I think they saw the pattern evolving in the world and decided, oh, this is not going to go well, and we should really impose stringent lockdowns. They immediately stopped flights, etc. So yeah, it's indeed, that is the case. That's what we think. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so more experience in dealing with these kinds of infectious diseases actually helped countries to make better decisions.
Absolutely, yeah.
I also have, maybe I'm keep talking, I'm sorry, but I have another question for Dicky about the situation in Jakarta. I'm now in Jakarta, and I follow, of course, on television, the numbers that are being produced every day on television. And I noticed that besides the number of infections and the number of deaths, also the number of people yang sembuh are mentioned, which is a bit strange to me, because how do you know people are sembuh? And we know from the Netherlands that people who didn't go to the hospital but were infected, actually after they pulih kembali, when they are back to normal, they have still a lot of difficulties in recuperating from the disease, and which can take months or even a year. So I was wondering, is also research on people who have gone through the emotions of being affected by COVID, and how their recuperation is going, whether they still have additional problems going back to normal.
Yeah. Thank you, Marek, for your question. Well, to be honest, I'm not deeply involved in the criteria for defining sembuh in the Dinkes DKI, and I'm mostly involved in the analyzing the data on the impact of obesity and diabetes on the outcome. But that's an interesting point of view about how COVID actually have a long impact on the health of the people suffering from the COVID-19, because we read from several publications that actually COVID-19 still have its effect even after weeks or months after get rid of the virus. So the PCR really negative, but people still suffering from some complaints. And in the Caramel study, I think Dr. Farid might also could add some addition. I think what we are trying to do, we also have the plan to perform as well as a longitudinal follow-up up to 6 to 12 months, just to see how the complaints of this subject, as well as to see how the immune response changes as well, and how it impacts the metabolic health as well, in terms of glucose and also all other metabolic parameters.
You mentioned the relation also between, about obesity and diabetes. I guess if you're diabetes, it's easy to measure, but what's the definition of obesity? Is it a certain percentage above your ideal body weight, so I'm obese or not?
Yeah, I think we are using the definition using the BMI, but there's a problem with the recorded data at the local health authorities. Mostly the field criteria for obesity is missing. So it's left blank by the authority. So we already try to make advocacy to the local health authorities to pay more attention in terms of obesity, try to include them on the data being reported. And now we are currently as well try to perform a primary study just to see how obesity impact the outcomes, maybe at the hospital base, because it might be more easier to have all those patients admitted at CIPTO being measured in terms of BMI and maybe waist circumference as well.
Thank you. I also have some questions from the participants that have been sent to us. From Aktorono Dwi from University of Indonesia. The question is, when the vaccine has been introduced, we are positive there will be a vaccine, how the current tests for screening and detection would be needed. I'm not sure who can answer this question, who can answer the question about after the vaccine has been introduced, how will the test for screening and detection be needed?
I think the Indonesian scientists should do that. So either Dicky, Farid, or Mikhael. I don't know which one wants to.
I also am not sure whether I understand the question. So when the vaccine is introduced, I think it's probably about the follow-up. How can you test or screen whether
So is it whether we still need diagnostic tests after we have discovered the vaccines? Well, if that is the line of the question, then I would say definitely we still need the tests and diagnostics to be done, because I think it would be very hard to hope that we will have 100% protective vaccine efficacy or even herd immunity after vaccination. I mean, after looking at how we fare with influenza vaccine so far. So, well, to be optimistic, we may hope for a really good vaccine, but then we have looked at how, when we become complacent for even a day or a week, then the infection prevalence can rise up again. So I think for sure we still need to maintain or even strengthen the diagnostic capacities.
Marik, but I think maybe Dito, you can also discuss a bit, but because the potential efficacy of this vaccine might differ, right, between urban and rural, because you presented in rural area, there's a more prevalent of HIV infections, more Th2. How about your thought on this, about the efficacy of vaccine?
Well, it is very difficult to say because immunology is way too complicated. Everything can be different when you look at different contexts, at which patient that you're looking at, the comorbidities that they have, and also, I guess it's just way too complicated. But I think, but then we can, after knowing that there's such geographical variations even within a country can exist, maybe we can be, we should not be complacent that when we deploy the vaccines throughout all regions in Indonesia, that we will always have a similar maximum vaccine efficacies throughout the region. So maybe we may expect that there will be variations in which, so that means a top-down approach from the central government to the provinces may not be really good. So everything has to be really based on the expertise of the local staff. But I haven't been in Indonesia for quite some years now, so I guess Farid and Dicky can answer that better than me.
Yeah, Marik and Dicky and Mikhael, I would like to add some other things. Like, we all know that the vaccine trial now in Indonesia are held in Bandung, in Hasan Sadikin, and the area around Hasan Sadikin, we could expect those areas are more or in urban areas. So this long-term vaccine study to evaluate the safety and efficacy of vaccine, maybe if we could see the safety and efficacy, hopefully we could expect that those apply now in the urban, but not necessarily applied in rural areas. So in long term, we need also to evaluate, like Mikhael had already mentioned, maybe if we decide to deploy all of the vaccines in all over Indonesia, so long-term studies has to be done to evaluate the effectivity and safety of those vaccines in other part of Indonesia, especially rural. I don't know how to measure, like maybe the immunoglobulins levels or antibody levels, and then other immune system parameters. I'm not immunologist, but so I don't really know how to measure those safety and efficacy. But that thing is very important in long term because we don't know those efficacy in rural area of Indonesia. Thank you.
So you can also say that whatever vaccine is going to be produced and implemented, it doesn't mean that it will help all people. It also depends on other circumstances.
Yeah, I think so. We still don't know about the response of this vaccine in certain type of people, especially in our setting in urban and also in rural.
Unmute,
well,
yes.
let alone response to vaccine, we still don't even know the prognostic factor that may relate to severe or mild COVID disease. And there are a lot of efforts going on right now. And regarding the female and male differences, I think there is a meta-archive paper by Professor Akiko Iwasaki from Yale showing that in female, they have a stronger CD4 T cell responses, for example. So they have a more robust immune response when they're infected by COVID. And interestingly, we also see a relation between immunosenescence, or the aging of the immune system, but then that only exists, interestingly, in the male population, but not in the female population. So there are a lot of intricacies and complexities in immune response to COVID. So, and then I think that that highlights the importance for Indonesia to have our own research agenda for the betterment of the health of our community.
Yeah, for sure, it's a very complicated issue. I have another question from Raya Makarim Penantian, also from UI. What is the role of telemedicine in COVID-19 pandemic, and how is the effectiveness so far? I'm not familiar with the term of telemedicine, so I'm not sure who can respond to this question.
Yeah, maybe I will try to answer. Maybe Dr. Farid could add some part as well. So yeah, and the telemedicine actually is very useful in this part of pandemic, because we try to reduce the risk of people gathering at the hospital, because it would increase the risk of COVID-19 infection as well. And in some part of the hospital that is the referral center for COVID-19, the risk for having the COVID-19 would be higher for people attending in this hospital. So for example, for diabetes and obesity, we are now advocating people that currently already uncontrolled on the blood glucose, for example, to go for the telemedicines. But not all people would then willing to do the telemedicines. In most part, they just don't show up at the hospital. They just continue their own medicine and so on. But with the use of telemedicine, actually we can improve this problem in terms of the pandemics. And for example, we have also advocated the BPJS as well, the Universal Health Coverage System, asking them, for now, people with diabetes need to come to the hospital to get their monthly prescriptions. We advocate them to allow people to get to the hospital for example, every 2 months, if the blood glucose is on well control. So it then reduce the risk of having an infection in crowded places. So I think the telemedicine is potentially could improve the disease management in general, especially on the non-communicable diseases. But the application in the community is not as maybe not as broad as we expected so far. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to add Dicky's point of view. So I agree with Dicky's point of view that telemedicine is really helpful in these current situations. Although, yeah, it very depends on technology. So we could expect that those people that live in urban and also knows technology like Zoom or other platform, they could adopt this type of telemedicine on or online consultation. But yeah, in areas in rural, yeah, we come back again to in urban and rural differences in this our COVID-19 situations. In rural, maybe there are few people that knows about this telemedicine technology. So yeah, I hope this online consultation or telemedicine will be very helpful for those people with comorbidities. But we will have to have a research in long term and a study in long term to see is it really helpful or not, and how much percentage of those patients with the comorbidities or chronic conditions that help or buy this technology. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think this pandemic will produce many lessons learned, I think, also for the future in terms of how to access data, how to compile data, but also maybe in the field of telemedicine. And that brings me actually to another question. I mean, we now we have a severe pandemics, but I understand that we have to be prepared that in the future we will have other pandemics. This is not the last one. It's a natural phenomenon that there are viruses. Would the next pandemic would that be a virus which is related to COVID, or could it be something completely different? I mean, this is a very strange question to ask, but maybe you can give some insight in how this phenomenon actually works. Ya, silahkan siapa yang.
Yeah, I would like to start very interesting questions, and yeah, I think we could learn a lot about this pandemic, because I think in the start of outbreak in our country, in Indonesia, the response from health authority or from the government, in my opinion, is very lacking, and makes people are now still believe with some misconception about COVID-19. Like what I already mentioned, that if you are getting COVID-19, you're young, you will not get severe, and you will not die. And then this is a rich people disease. If you're not, if you're poor or from slum area, you don't have to worry about this disease. And how the healthcare facilities are also adapting for this. That's the other one is how healthcare facilities adapt to this pandemic. Previously, we never had such high scale of pandemic. Previously, during SARS-CoV-1 and also MERS, we heard the cases, but we prepare, but it's not as this big scale. And I think we could learn about this SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, like I already heard about in Taiwan. They learned a lot about SARS, and they could very good in containing the virus. So yeah, hopefully we could learn from these mistakes. Yeah.
I think many countries probably have to learn from their mistakes in terms of how they handled the initial phase of the pandemic. You mentioned that migration is also contributing to the infection rate. I was wondering whether during the Idul Fitri, whether there are data that the Idul Fitri of people pulang kampung, whether that had led to an increase of infections in rural areas. Although, I mean, I know the government said that, you know, we don't celebrate Idul Fitri, you have to stay at home, don't go to your kampung, but we know that a lot of people did. Did you notice in your data there was an increase in infections after the Idul Fitri?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I tried to mention about that in my presentations, but yeah, I don't have much time. So yeah, it's very interesting with our culture about Idul Fitri and Mudik. So unfortunately, I don't have exact data about the increase of cases of COVID-19 in the other area because of Mudik. But from what I heard about the news from the news, yes, we could observe an increase of the cases, especially in Surabaya. So we could see that after Idul Fitri, the cases in Surabaya is getting crazy, and a lot of people and a lot of doctors died because of this COVID-19 in Surabaya after Idul Fitri. And then after that, we could see that there's a decrease and they learn about their mistakes, but now we could see an increase in all over Indonesia. I think because of the less restriction and people already bored with the lockdown, and yeah, that's the reason. Maybe other speakers have their share of thoughts.
May I just say one thing? I think indeed many countries are learning from this pandemic, but I think regarding first, maybe if direct answer to Marek's question of what would be the next pandemic. I don't think we know, but viral infections are becoming more and more problematic because of the closeness of humans with nature also, because we're invading nature, we're cutting down trees. So we know that proximity to certain habitats is really going to be a problem. So it's a broader thing that we need to work together with, biodiversity people, with all kinds of sectors to prevent the next pandemic. But in terms of research, what I just, having worked with, collaborated with Indonesia for many years, very many bright people working in Indonesia. One thing I think it would be really good to really capture what is unique about Indonesia. How can Indonesia uniquely contribute to the COVID-19, to the new pandemic? So please learn from your strengths rather than copy what many other countries have done. Me too, because, yes, you have to really ask the questions that nobody else can, or very few people can answer, really capitalizing on what is valuable and what is special about Indonesia. I think that would be really important in terms of Indonesians' contribution to the current pandemic and to the new pandemic. So that's, I just wanted to make sure that this is said. Thank you.
Yes, I agree. I think every country has its unique circumstances and how to deal and how to study and how to prepare for pandemics like this. So I think Indonesia is in a very unique position to also contribute to that research. I'm looking at the time. We are almost running out of time. There's one questions from, I'm sorry, I'm having difficulty pronouncing the name, maybe Tu Keongwe. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. The question is, did you look at the intake of traditional remedies or medicines in rural population and their effect on COVID-19 progression compared to urban Indonesians? So it's more about traditional remedies. I know I read on internet that traditional remedies were introduced, claiming that it was a kind of obat for COVID. But to what extent scientifically are traditional remedies involved in looking for a cure for COVID-19 progression? Siapa yang bisa menjawab?
Yeah, maybe I will add a bit. I cannot answer that question actually because we haven't had any data on the herbal remedies. Maybe Dr. Farid could add some part on that. But the thing is, there's I think the Ministry of Research now currently, I think, granting several research fund to fund this kind of project. I think I saw several herbs medicine from Indonesia now currently having their ongoing trial. So we look forward for the result of those trials, hopefully in the next future. But I think a lot of research grants on those issues has been granted for funding from the Ministry of Research. Thank you.
That was from Ristek Brin, if I'm not mistaken. They had these kind of programs, yes. Do you personally believe that local remedies could contribute? Or are you more like it should be on a more scientific way, or is the research on local remedies done scientifically so that you, whatever it is the outcome, that you can acknowledge the outcome?
Well, I can say that. Go ahead, Dr. Dicky.
No, fine. I'm just saying I'll still wait for the results first, and then I can say something.
Well, regarding herbal remedies, at least I can say that two malaria drugs are actually from plants, the chloroquine and artemisinin. So yes, it is very possible that naturally occurring materials out there can be a really effective or even revolutionary drugs. It is possible, but then I think it is best for us to impose the same standard. Either it is a naturally occurring molecules or an artificially made molecules before we can really say that this is effective for one thing or the other.
Would the perception that local remedies work contribute to a misperception of how to deal with COVID, especially maybe in rural areas, more or less uneducated people who believe that this would work? Is this a problem in Indonesia or even outside Indonesia, you think?
Yeah, I will try to answer it. I think in one side, yeah, for me, that could be a problem if a lot of people, because now we already know, we all know that there is no exact cure for SARS-CoV-2 infection, especially for those who severe or critical conditions. So if we expect or hope a lot toward the herbal medicine or traditional medicines, this could lead to a misconception that they will not get infected or will get cured if we consume or prevented to get infection if we consume certain herbal or traditional medicine. So a lot of trials has to be done to prove that certain remedies or certain traditional medicine is effective in boost immune system toward or to cope toward COVID-19. Yeah, we still don't know which traditional remedies that effective in this COVID-19. But I believe the potential is very high, and I believe someday we could see some drugs that comes from traditional remedies or medicine that really works for COVID-19, hopefully. But we need a lot of research.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, at least we know that you don't need to drink bleach. That's something that you should not do. That has been proven to be very wrong. Thank you very much. I think we already we have already finished our time. I would like to thank the esteemed speakers for their contribution. It was very informative, even for me as a non-medical background. I think it was quite interesting to know about the situation in terms of spreading of the disease, the difference between immune systems in rural and urban areas, how environment plays a big role in whether you're more susceptible to get the virus. Unfortunately, we still have to wait for the research and outcome on a possible vaccine or drug that can combat the crisis. And for now, we have to stay healthy and stay waspada terus, menurut saya, just to keep our guards up. I would like to thank all the participants that have joined the webinar, and I hope to maybe see some of you again in the next webinar of Leiden Lecture Series. We have this lecture series every month,